What's up YouTube, this is Jump77, and for this video, I'm going to be suggesting erratas for 13 more cards that are currently on the forbidden list in both the OCG and the TCG. Sorry, I will not be covering Baron de Fleur, Borreload, or Link Karibo in this video. Although I do have suggestions on how to fix those pretty easily. Alright, let's start things off with Elder Entity Norden, one of the key cards in a lot of rank 4 spam decks, including Zodiacs. Why? Because when this card is special summoned, you can resurrect any level 4 or lower monster from your graveyard. Because of this effect triggers when special summoned, many players didn't bother with fusion summoning it with any 2 Synchro and or Xyz monsters. They mainly used instant fusion in order to get Norden out. So, how do we fix this card? First, we need to make it so that you must first fusion summon this card with the above materials in order to get it out. By doing it this way, you can't cheat Norden out with instant fusion like you did before. Now, this means that Norden will become a super popular target, which may not be a bad thing depending on the meta. Also, its effect on special summoning from the graveyard needs to be a hard once per turn and only once that turn. Next up is Fiber Jar. This flipped effect monster restarts the entire duel by shuffling everything in both players' hands, field, and graveyard. Then both players draw 5 cards. This was a headache that many players didn't want to deal with back when this card was legal. Now, many can make the argument that this card could come back as is. And I was one of them. Until I remembered that Prediction Princess was a thing. You see, Prediction Princess has a ritual monster called Prediction Princess Territory, which has the power to revive any flip effect monster from the graveyard in face down defense position. It can also flip your flip effect monster face up whenever you want. So, how do we fix this issue? The only way I can think of is by giving Fiber Jar's flip effect a once per duel clause. Now we come to Fishsport Blaster, which can continuously special summon itself from your graveyard as long as you have a card in your hand to discard and control a face-up level 3 or lower water monster. This was a super powerful effect back during the Synchro era and would be extremely powerful in today's game. So how do we fix this? The only way I can think of would be to give Fishsport Blaster's revival effect a hard once per turn and only once that turn clause. Our next card is Giant Trunade. This card returned all spells and traps on the field to the hand, which allowed you to deal with your opponent's annoying back row so that you can go game. It also allowed you to reuse your face-up spells and traps for further advantage, such as Premature Barrier. So, how do we fix this card? The best way I can think of to fix this card would be to make it so that you cannot activate any spells or traps from the hand for the rest of the turn you activate Giant Trunade. And slap and activate 1 copy per turn clause for good measure. The next card on our list is Graceful Charity. This card allowed you to draw 3 cards, but you had to discard 2 cards from your hand. So this card basically allowed you to dig deeper into your deck, while also potentially allowing you to set up some graveyard plays. This card also works well for decks that benefited from being discard, such as Dark Worlds and Fables. So how do we fix this card? Well, I would add a clause where you don't draw cards with card effects or activate card effects in the graveyard when you activate Graceful Charity. I will also slap and you can only activate 1 copy per turn for good measure. Next up is Grinder Golem, another token generator. This card generates tokens on your field when you special summon Grinder Golem to your opponent's field. It also locked you out of normal summoning and setting monsters for the rest of the turn. Doesn't sound like a good card, does it? Well, it was until Firewall Dragon came along. Thanks to Firewall Dragon's bouncing effect, you could abuse Grinder Golem's token generating effects until you had developed your broken Extra Link board. Despite Firewall Dragon receiving an errata, Grinder Golem has not come off the ban list. This tells me that Konami still fears Grinder Golem's token generating power. So, how do we fix this? The answer is simple. Give Grinder Golem's token generating ability a hard once per turn and only once that turn. We now come to the two banned Guard Dragon Link monsters, Agripane and LP. These two Link monsters allowed the player to special summon very powerful dragon monsters to a zone that two or more Link monsters point to, with their effects intact. With LP, you can special summon one from your hand or deck. With Agripane, you can special summon from your extra deck. It also didn't help that they require dragon monsters as material to link summon. So any dragon deck could use these two cards. So how do we fix these? The first change I would make will be to change their summoning conditions to require Guard Dragon monsters. For LP, you would need a level 4 or lower Guard Dragon monster. With Agripane, you need 2 Guard Dragon monsters. The next change would be that the dragon monster these two cards summon would have their effects negated. I would also take it a step further when it comes to Agripane, and have the monster that it summoned with its effect be banished when Agripane leaves the field. That should be enough to allow them to come back, but if you have any other ideas, feel free to let me know. We now come to the card that was a ruling nightmare back when it was legal. Last Turn. Last Turn was one of the earliest auto win cards outside of Exodia and Destiny board. But you had to go through a lot of hoops to get there. 1, you had to activate it on your opponent's turn. 2, you had to have 1,000 life points or lower. 3, you need to have a monster to target and stay on your side of the field. Also, you need to have to worry about if your opponent had a monster that had higher attack than the monster that you targeted. Oh, and the card created some weird special battle phase, which caused the ruling nightmare. Now, most players back when the card was legal would bypass a lot of these hoops by having cards like Jalgun the Spiritualist on the field. This would prevent your opponent from special summoning from the deck and guaranteeing an automatic win. Plus, there are some cards in the game that purposely decrease their life points to the amount required to activate Last Turn. Given that there are many more cards like Jalgun in the game now, it's unlikely that Last Turn can come back as it is. So, how do we fix this? Well, we may have to bite the bullet, as it were, and give Last Turn the same errata treatment that Crush Card Virus got, which basically changed the effect in its entirety. I would have it where it can only be activated during your opponent's battle phase, while you have 1,000 life points or lower. Then, I would have both players send all cards in their hands and fields to the graveyard, and special summon one monster from their decks that can be normal summon / set with the highest attack. Those two summon monsters would battle, and whoever had the strongest monster wins the duel. And I would make sure that you could only activate Last Turn per match, which should prevent players from relying on Last Turn to win every duel. It was the best I could come up with. If you have any better ideas, feel free to let me know. The next card up is Last Will. This card allowed you to special summon a monster with 1,500 or less attack from your deck when a monster you control is sent to the graveyard. It didn't matter if it was destroyed by battle or card effect, or used as a tribute, or whatever. As long as that monster was on your field and was sent to the graveyard, you could use Last Will. To see what I mean, check out Simo's Progression series as well as History of the OCG. So how do we fix this card? I would have it where you could only activate this card during your main phase if a monster you control was destroyed by an opponent's card. Also, the monster you special summon with this card must be a monster that can be normal summoned / set. And add a once per duel clause for good measure. The next card I'm going to be looking at is one that I debated whether or not to include on here. That card being Lovable Chain. This card is a deck manipulator. By detaching a material, you could either send a card from your deck to the graveyard or choose to place a monster on the top of your deck. And it didn't help that this card's summoning conditions were generic, which means any deck that can exceed summon a rank 4 monster could bring this card out. What ultimately got this card banned was its sent to the graveyard effect. So how do we fix this card? The first change I would make would be to change its summoning conditions to require 2 level 4 fire monsters. The only other change would be that when you sent a card from deck to graveyard, you couldn't activate any cards or effects of cards with that sent card's name for the rest of the turn. Next card up is Level Eater. This card allowed players to continuously special summon until they had the mighty shooting Quasar Dragon on the field. While that annoyed many players, when Link Summoning came around, Level Eater got worse. You see, as long as you had a level 5 or higher monster or monsters on your field, you could continuously revive Level Eater just by removing a level from those monsters. So how do we fix this card? The only solution I could come up with was to have it where you could only use Level Eater's revival effect once per turn and only once that turn. Another idea I had was basically when you use the revival effect, you were locked into summoning synchro monsters from the extra deck for the rest of the turn. And finally, we come to Link Cross. This card was another token generator. While you couldn't use those tokens for a Link summon, that doesn't mean you can't use them for other purposes. Also, the card was semi-generic in its summoning conditions, as it required 1 Link 2 or higher Link monster. Why is that important? Well, the higher the Link rating of the material, the more tokens you can make. So, how do we fix this card? The only way I could think of to fix this card would be to give it a similar treatment to what Firewall Dragon got. Link Cross needs to be locked into Cyberse. First, I would have it where Link Cross required 1 Link 2 or higher Cyberse Link monster. Also, when you generated the tokens, you couldn't special summon for the rest of the turn except for Cyberse monsters. Now, some might argue this will make Cyberse-themed decks more powerful, but it was the best I could come up with. If you have any other better ideas on how to fix Link Cross or any of the other cards I mentioned before, please feel free to let me know in the comment section. As always, I'm Jeff77, signing out.